People love to laugh at the man preparing for a disaster, right up until the sky actually falls. Arthur spent 2 grueling years pouring reinforced concrete into the earth, while his neighbors scoffed. But when the deadliest blizzard in a century swallowed our town, those arrogant laughs turned into desperate, freezing pleas. The affluent mountain town of Oakhaven, Camelot, was a place where image was everything. Nestled among towering pines and striking limestone cliffs, it was a haven for wealthy remote workers, trust fund inheritors, and local business owners who catered to them. Among the manicured lawns and sweeping, glass-walled chalets, Arthur Sterling's property stuck out like a sore thumb. Arthur wasn't from Oakhaven. He had arrived 3 years prior from Chicago, a structural engineer who had quietly purchased a massive 10-acre plot at the bottom of the valley. He was 32, ruggedly handsome, but notoriously quiet, with dark, intense eyes that always seemed to be calculating the weight-bearing load of whatever room he was standing in. Camilla Hayes noticed him the very first week he arrived. Camilla owned the Daily Grind, the local coffee shop and bakery that served as Oakhaven's unofficial gossip hub. Every morning at 6 a.m., Arthur would come in, order a large black coffee, and sketch in a leather-bound notebook. Camilla found herself inexplicably drawn to his quiet focus, a stark contrast to the loud, boastful men she usually dealt with, men exactly like her fiancé, Derek Beaumont. Derek was a luxury real estate developer whose family practically owned half the town. He was charismatic, impeccably dressed, and completely devoid of empathy. To Derek, Arthur wasn't just a newcomer. He was an eyesore. The mockery began when the excavation started. For months, heavy machinery dug a massive, gaping crater in Arthur's front yard. When the delivery trucks started arriving, the town's curiosity morphed into ridicule. Arthur wasn't building a pool or a wine cellar. He was installing industrial-grade air scrubbers, reinforced steel blast doors, and massive subterranean water tanks. He was building a survival shelter, a massive one. "Have you seen Doomsday Artie's latest delivery?" Derek announced one evening at Camilla's shop, his voice booming so the entire room could hear. He leaned against the espresso counter, a smirk playing on his lips. 3 pallets of freeze-dried rations. I swear the guy thinks the Russians are going to bomb a ski town. It's pathetic. A chorus of laughter rippled through the coffee shop. Camilla felt a hot flush of embarrassment, not for Arthur, but for Derek's cruelty. She looked toward the corner booth. Arthur was sitting there, his coffee untouched, his eyes locked on Derek. He didn't look angry. He looked profoundly tired. "Derek, stop it," Camilla whispered, wiping down the counter aggressively. "It's his property. He can do what he wants." "Oh, come on, Camilla," Derek scoffed, wrapping an arm around her waist, which she stiffly endured. "The man is dragging down local property values with his paranoid delusions. Oakhaven is a safe haven. The only disaster we face here is when the country club runs out of gin." The breaking point for Arthur's reputation occurred during the town's annual autumn gala. Derek had cornered Arthur near the bar, holding a martini and an unlit cigar, surrounded by a sycophantic crowd of local elites, including Sophia Jenkins, the town's lead gossip, and Tom Willis, the mayor's son. Derek loudly offered to buy Arthur's property for pennies on the dollar to pave over his concrete tomb and build a decent tennis court. Arthur slowly set his glass down. The room fell into a tense, expectant silence. Camilla watched from across the room, her heart pounding against her ribs. "The climate is shifting, Derek," Arthur said, his voice low but carrying a terrifying, absolute certainty. "The jet streams are destabilizing. The old weather patterns you rely on to keep your fragile glass houses safe are gone. When the grid fails, your money won't keep you warm." Derek burst into theatrical laughter, slapping his knee. "Right! And when the Ice Age comes, We'll all come knocking on your steel door, Artie." "I wouldn't advise it," Arthur replied coldly. Before Derek could retort, Arthur's eyes found Camilla in the crowd. For a fleeting second, the coldness in his gaze melted into something soft, almost pleading, a silent warning meant only for her. Then he turned and walked out into the crisp autumn night. Camilla wanted to follow him, to apologize for the town, for Derek, for her own silent complicity. But she stayed rooted to the spot, anchored by the heavy, diamond engagement ring on her left hand. January arrived with a brutal, biting chill, but nothing that Oakhaven couldn't handle. The locals prided themselves on their winter resilience. So, when the National Weather Service began issuing frantic, unprecedented warnings about a bomb cyclone merging with an Arctic polar vortex, the residents of Oakhaven barely blinked. It was a Saturday night, and Derek was hosting an extravagant engagement celebration at his newly constructed architectural marvel on the upper ridge of the valley. The house was a monument to his ego. 3 stories of floor-to-ceiling imported glass, an open concept layout, and a massive floating staircase. It was beautiful, but as Arthur had once pointed out in passing, it possessed 0 thermal mass. 70 of Oakhaven's wealthiest residents were packed into the living room, sipping champagne and dancing to a live jazz quartet. Outside, the snow began to fall, not the gentle, picturesque flakes of a snow globe, but heavy, horizontal sheets of ice, driven by wind that sounded like a freight train. By 9 p.m., the wind speeds hit 80 miles per hour. The massive glass panes of Derek's house began to shudder violently in their frames. Camilla stood by a pillar, nervously watching the storm swallow the town below. The valley was completely invisible, erased by a wall of violent white. "Derek, we should send people home," Camilla urged, grabbing his arm as he walked by with a fresh drink. "The roads are going to be impassable." "Relax, Camilla," Derek slurred slightly, pulling his arm away. "The plows will be out by morning. We have underfloor heating and a fully stocked bar. We'll have a sleepover." At 9:43 p.m., the jazz quartet abruptly stopped as every light in the house instantly died. The immediate silence was terrifying, quickly replaced by the deafening, monstrous roar of the wind battering the glass. Panic rippled through the dark room. Phones were pulled out, their flashlights casting eerie, shaking shadows against the walls. "Don't panic!" Derek yelled over the noise. "The backup generator will kick in. 10 seconds." They waited in the freezing dark. 10 seconds passed, then a minute, then 5. "Derek?" Camilla asked, her voice trembling. "The generator?" I don't know," Derek stammered, his bravado entirely vanished. "The maintenance guys were supposed to service it last month. I haven't checked it." Within 30 minutes, the reality of their situation set in. Without the power grid, Derek's modern masterpiece was nothing more than a glass freezer. The temperature inside plummeted at a terrifying rate. Guests in their silk dresses and tailored suits began to shiver violently, huddling together for warmth. Then came the sound that would haunt Camilla for the rest of her life. Crack. A gust of wind, later estimated at over 110 miles per hour, caught a heavy patio chair that had been left unsecured outside. It hurled the metal frame through the massive 2-story living room window. The glass exploded inward like a bomb. Instantly, the storm invaded the house. The temperature in the room dropped to -20 degrees in seconds. Snow and shards of glass tore through the air. Screams erupted as people scrambled away from the gaping hole. But there was nowhere to go. The wind ripped through the open concept house, blowing out 2 more windows on the opposite side due to the pressure differential. The house was compromised. "We have to leave!" Tom Willis screamed over the howling wind, his face already turning pale blue. "We'll freeze to death in here. We have to get to the cars." "The cars are buried," Sophia Jenkins sobbed, pointing her phone flashlight toward the driveway, where 4 feet of snow had already drifted against the vehicles. Camilla's mind raced. The road down the mountain was suicide. The nearest neighbor was miles away, except for one. "Arthur's!" Camilla screamed, grabbing Derek by the lapels of his suit. "Arthur's house is at the bottom of the ridge. It's only half a mile down the private trail." Derek looked at her as if she were insane. "We are not going to that freak's basement." "Derek, we are going to die in here!" Camilla shrieked, the biting cold already numbing her fingers and toes. She turned to the terrified guests. "Anyone who wants to live, grab the heaviest coats from the coat room. We have to hike down the ridge trail to the Sterling property." Only a handful were brave or desperate enough to follow her. Derek, realizing he was losing control and freezing, reluctantly joined them, alongside Sophia, Tom, and a few others. They wrapped themselves in multiple layers of expensive, wholly inadequate designer winter coats, tied scarves around their faces, and forced the front door open against the snowdrift. Stepping outside was like stepping onto another planet. The cold was a physical assault, a brutal, heavy weight that stole the breath from their lungs. The snow was blinding, stinging their eyes like shattered glass. The half-mile hike down the ridge, which usually took 10 minutes in the summer, became a grueling march for survival. Camilla led the way, using her memory of the trail to navigate the whiteout. Every step was a battle against the knee-deep snow. Halfway down, Sophia stumbled and fell, crying out in pain. Camilla immediately stopped, turning back to help her up. "Leave her!" Derek screamed over the wind, pushing past Camilla, knocking her into the snowdrift. "She's slowing us down. I'm freezing, Camilla." Camilla stared at Derek's retreating back as he selfishly plowed ahead, leaving his fiancée and his friend behind. In that freezing, blinding darkness, the illusion of Derek Beaumont completely shattered. He wasn't a protector. He was a coward. Gritting her teeth, Camilla pulled Sophia to her feet, supporting the woman's weight on her shoulder. "Keep moving," Camilla panted, her throat burning with the icy air. "We're almost there." After what felt like hours, a faint, amber light pierced the violent whiteout. It was a heavy, reinforced outdoor lantern. Behind it stood the dark, solid shape of Arthur's unassuming above-ground cabin. Derek had already reached the front porch. He was pounding his fists raw against the heavy steel-reinforced door, screaming into the wind. "Open up! Collins, open the damn door!" Camilla dragged Sophia up the steps, her own body beginning to shut down. Her vision was tunneling. The hypothermia was setting in deep. She collapsed against the heavy metal door, her trembling hand reaching out to knock, though she had no strength left. Had he heard them? Would he even open it? After everything they had said, after the humiliation they had put him through? Why would he? Camilla closed her eyes, the roar of the blizzard fading as darkness crept in at the edges of her mind. Then she heard the heavy, metallic thud of a deadbolt sliding back. The heavy steel door swung inward, and the immediate, violent contrast was a shock to the system. The howling, demonic roar of the blizzard was instantly severed as Arthur grabbed the freezing collar of Derek's ruined designer coat, hauling him over the threshold. Camilla dragged Sophia in next, stumbling blindly onto a grated metal floor. Tom Willis fell in behind them, gasping for air as if he had been drowning. With a deafening metallic clack, Arthur engaged the deadbolt, followed by the spinning of a heavy, submarine-style locking wheel. The absolute silence that fell over the room was heavier than the storm outside. "Get their wet layers off. Now," Arthur commanded. His voice wasn't panicked. It was the steady, authoritative tone of a man operating exactly in his element. Camilla blinked through the ice melting on her eyelashes. They were in a decontamination and mudroom, bathed in the soft, warm glow of amber LED lights. The air was incredibly, impossibly warm. It smelled of clean ozone and faint cedar, not the dusty, damp mildew she had expected from a bunker. Arthur didn't wait for Derek, who was collapsed on a bench, shivering violently and moaning. He moved immediately to Camilla, his large, calloused hands gently but swiftly unbuttoning her frozen, ice-caked overcoat. "I've got you," Arthur murmured, his dark eyes meeting hers. The cold distance he usually kept at the coffee shop was gone, replaced by a fierce, protective focus. "You're safe now, Camilla." He draped a heavy, heated, mylar-lined fleece blanket over her shoulders, then knelt to examine Sophia's leg. Tom helped his friend out of his frozen boots, staring around the room in absolute awe. "Through that door," Arthur instructed, pointing to a reinforced secondary bulkhead. "Main living quarters. There are cots, medical supplies, and hot water." As they shuffled through the inner door, the survivors of Oakhaven's elite circle were struck speechless. This was no concrete tomb. Arthur's shelter was a marvel of subterranean engineering. The main hall was expansive, featuring polished concrete floors heated by a geothermal loop. Recessed lighting mimicked natural daylight, illuminating a massive, fully stocked kitchen with stainless steel appliances powered by a deep-cycle battery bank. Down a wide hallway, they could see a hydroponic garden glowing with violet UV lights, where fresh tomatoes, kale, and herbs grew in neat, automated rows. It was better equipped than Derek's multi-million-dollar glass house. "My God," Sophia whispered, leaning heavily on Camilla. "He really did it." Derek staggered into the main room, clutching his heated blanket like a king's robes. Even in his hypothermic state, his arrogance was already beginning to thaw. He looked around the pristine environment, his eyes darting over the expensive solar inverters, the massive racks of freeze-dried provisions, and the sophisticated air filtration system humming quietly in the corner. "Well, Sterling," Derek forced a shaking sneer, trying to reclaim his shattered pride. "I suppose even a broken clock is right twice a day. Got any scotch down here in your little panic room? My nerves are shot." Arthur paused, holding a first aid kit. He looked at Derek with a mixture of pity and profound disgust. "The water dispenser is by the sink. Hydrate. The shock is going to set in soon." "I asked for a drink, Arthur," Derek snapped, his voice rising, the embarrassment of his cowardice on the trail twisting into defensive anger. "I think we deserve some hospitality after having to hike through that hellscape because my house had a structural defect." "Your house was a vanity project, built by a man who refuses to acknowledge reality," Arthur replied evenly, stepping closer to Derek. The sheer physical presence of the engineer forced Derek to take a half step back. "There are 65 people currently freezing to death in your shattered living room, Beaumont. I've already engaged the ham radio to contact the State Emergency Operations Center in Denver. I spoke with Director Mitchell Harrison. They are mobilizing tracked vehicles, but they can't breach the valley until the wind speeds drop below 60 miles per hour. That won't happen for at least 2 days. Derek's face drained of color. 2 days. "If they survive, it will be a miracle," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "So no, I am not pouring you a scotch. Sit down, shut up, and be grateful you aren't buried in a snowdrift." Derek opened his mouth to argue, but the sheer fury in Camilla's eyes stopped him dead. She looked at her fiancé, the man who had pushed her down in the snow, who had abandoned Sophia, who was now demanding liquor while his party guests were dying, and felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the cold. "Sit down, Derek," Camilla said, her voice dripping with venom, "before I throw you back outside myself." For the next 48 hours, the shelter became a microcosm of human nature pushed to its limits. Above them, the storm raged with apocalyptic fury, dumping 60 inches of snow on Oak Haven and snapping centuries-old pine trees like toothpicks. Below ground, Arthur was a tireless guardian. He cooked hot meals using the electric induction stove, rotated their thermal blankets, and carefully monitored Sophia's sprained ankle and Tom's mild frostbite. Camilla found herself shadowing him. She helped him harvest fresh basil from the hydroponic bay to put in a massive pot of tomato soup. In the quiet hum of the garden room, away from Derek's constant pacing and complaining, the tension between Camilla and Arthur transformed into something deeply intimate. "You knew this was going to happen, didn't you?" Camilla asked softly, watching him check the pH levels of the water basin. "I didn't know when," Arthur corrected, wiping his hands on a towel. He looked at her, the violet light casting sharp shadows across his jawline. "As an engineer, I look at data. The grid in this county is 50 years old. The weather patterns are increasingly volatile. Oak Haven was a disaster waiting to happen. People here were so insulated by their wealth, they forgot that nature doesn't care about your bank account." He stepped closer to her, his gaze dropping to the diamond ring on her left hand. I hated watching you get tied to a world that was so incredibly fragile. To a man who is so incredibly fragile." Camilla looked down at the ring. It felt heavy. It felt like a shackle. "He left Sophia behind on the trail," she whispered, a tear finally escaping her eye. "He pushed me down to save himself." Arthur's jaw tightened. He reached out, his warm, rough thumb gently wiping the tear from her cheek. "I would never have left you behind, Camilla. Never." The space between them vanished. When Arthur kissed her, it wasn't hesitant. It was a grounding, overwhelming force, a promise of safety and absolute devotion. Camilla kissed him back with a desperate intensity, pouring all her fear, relief, and hidden longing into the embrace. She felt his strong arms wrap around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest, anchoring her in a world that had completely spun out of control. For the first time in her life, Camilla felt truly, undeniably secure. By the morning of the third day, the low-frequency thrumming of the wind against the earth above finally began to subside. But the tension inside the bunker was reaching a boiling point. Derek had spent the last 2 days ostracized. Camilla refused to speak to him, and even Tom and Sophia looked at him with veiled contempt. Cut off from his wealth, his status, and his sycophants, Derek's facade completely crumbled. He was paranoid, agitated, and desperate to regain control. The twist came at 3 a.m. Camilla was a light sleeper. The trauma of the blizzard left her waking at the slightest sound. She heard the soft, mechanical hiss of the heavy pneumatic door that led to Arthur's lower equipment bay. Slipping out of her cot, she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and crept down the hallway. The lights in the main quarters were dimmed to a soft blue for the night. She peered around the corner into the lower garage. Derek was standing near the back wall, frantically pulling levers on the heavy steel secondary exit doors that led to the access tunnel. In the center of the garage sat Arthur's prized possession, an imported, military-grade Haglund's Bondwagen 206, a fully enclosed dual-cab tracked snowcat designed for extreme Arctic environments. Derek had Arthur's key ring in his hand. He was packing a heavy duffel bag with survival rations, medical kits, and 2 of the heated blankets. He wasn't preparing a rescue mission. He was leaving. "What are you doing?" Camilla's voice cut through the cavernous garage like a whip. Derek jumped, dropping a flare gun. He spun around, his eyes wild and unhinged. "Camilla! Good. you're awake. Grab your coat. We're getting out of here." "The state rescue teams are coming today, Derek," Camilla said, stepping fully into the light. She looked at the single duffel bag. "You're stealing his vehicle. You're stealing his supplies." "He has plenty," Derek hissed, rushing forward and grabbing her wrist. "Listen to me. The town is ruined. My house is gone. The market here is going to collapse. I heard Arthur on the radio earlier. They're prioritizing the injured at the country club. We'll be stuck in this concrete coffin for another week. There's a private airstrip in the next county over. My jet is there. If we take this snowcat now, we can be in Aspen by noon." Camilla stared at him, utterly appalled. "You're going to abandon Sophia? Tom? You're going to steal from the man who saved our lives? He's a freak, Camilla, a paranoid freak who got lucky." Derek spat, his grip tightening on her wrist. "We don't belong here with these people. We are Beaumonts. We survive." "Let her go." The voice was terrifyingly calm, but it echoed off the concrete walls with the force of a physical blow. Arthur stood at the top of the garage stairs, shirtless, wearing only a pair of tactical canvas pants. His muscles were corded with tension, and his eyes were cold enough to freeze boiling water. Derek scoffed, though his hand trembled as he reached into his pocket. "Back off, Sterling. I'm taking the cat. I'll wire you $500,000 when I reach civilization. You can buy yourself a new toy." "You're not taking anything," Arthur said, descending the metal stairs with slow, deliberate steps. Panic overtook Derek. In a flash of pure, desperate cowardice, he pulled a heavy, steel-barreled flare gun from his pocket, the one he had just dropped, and aimed it directly at Arthur's chest. "I said stay back!" Derek screamed, his voice cracking. "At this range, this will blow a hole right through you!" Camilla gasped, but Arthur didn't even break his stride. He continued walking, his dark eyes locked onto Derek's terrified face. "You don't know the first thing about pressure, Derek," Arthur said softly. When Arthur was just 2 feet away, Derek squeezed the trigger. Click. Nothing happened. Derek stared at the gun in horror, pulling the trigger again and again. Click, click, click. Arthur casually reached out, grabbed the barrel of the flare gun, and twisted it effortlessly out of Derek's grip. "The ammunition for the emergency flares is locked in the armory safe. You grabbed an empty casing from the training drawer. Like I said, you refuse to acknowledge reality." With a swift, fluid motion, Arthur grabbed Derek by the collar, spun him around, and slammed him against the cold steel of the snowcat. He didn't hit him. He simply held him there, letting Derek feel the absolute, unbreakable physical power that Arthur possessed. Derek whimpered, his bravado entirely crushed. "Pack your bag, Derek," Arthur whispered into his ear. "Because the second the state vehicles clear the access tunnel, you are leaving my property, and you are never coming back." Arthur shoved him away. Derek stumbled, falling to his knees on the concrete floor, a pathetic, broken shell of the man who had once ruled Oakhaven. Camilla walked up to Derek. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply reached down, slid the massive diamond ring off her finger, and let it drop onto the concrete floor. The sharp clink of the diamond against the stone sounded incredibly final. "Goodbye, Derek," she said. She turned and walked back up the stairs, sliding her hand into Arthur's as they returned to the warmth of the living quarters. At noon that day, the heavy steel doors of the shelter finally opened to the outside world. The sunlight was blinding. As Arthur, Camilla, Sophia, and Tom stepped out onto the surface, they were met with a landscape that was unrecognizable. Oakhaven was buried. The sweeping glass chalets on the ridge were shattered, buried under massive snowdrifts. The town below was a sea of white. In the distance, the heavy, rhythmic thumping of military-grade helicopters cut through the crisp mountain air, accompanied by the low rumble of State Guard snowcats breaching the valley roads. Rescue had arrived. As the medical team swarmed the property, taking Sophia and Tom to the transport vehicles, Derek quietly slipped away, slinking into the back of a National Guard truck without looking back, a disgraced exile in the town he once owned. Camilla stood on the porch of the unassuming cabin above the bunker, her breath pluming in the freezing air. She looked at the devastation of the valley, and then she looked at Arthur. He stood beside her, a solid, unmoving pillar against the stark white landscape. He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close, his warmth radiating through her winter coat. They had lost the town, but they had survived the storm. And as Camilla leaned her head against his shoulder, looking out over the frozen world, she knew she had finally found the safest place on Earth. The blizzard of 2026 stripped Oak Haven of its vanity, leaving only the truth behind. Money and status cannot buy survival, nor can they purchase character. Arthur built a fortress of concrete, but it was his quiet compassion that truly saved them. Today, the shelter remains beneath our home, a silent guardian, while above ground we built something even stronger, a life rooted in genuine love and unshakable resilience.